Hey everyone.
Hey everyone.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be talking about pregnancy, maternity leave, family planning, etc. as a travel therapist. This was a topic that I didn't think really many people would be interested in, but we asked on Instagram and turns out there are a lot of people interested. So we definitely don't know everything. This is going to be our first baby and we don't know how everything's going to go, but we can definitely talk through some of the considerations that we had, some of the things that we've found out going through the process that will hopefully help some of you guys as well. So Whitney's going to introduce us and then we'll jump right in.
Hey everyone. For those that may not know us, we are Whitney and Jared Kazaza. We're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We started Travel PT when we were new grads in 2015, so we've been doing this for almost 10 years now. We travel off and on. We traveled full-time for the first 3 years, and these days we travel part-time. Lately that's looked like taking about one contract a year. And we'll talk more about that as we get into this topic about kind of the trajectory and path of our lives and where we're at now, and the fact that we don't work full-time anymore, because that definitely plays into our current situation. I'm currently 33 weeks pregnant, so about 7.5 months, and this is our first baby, as Jared said. So yeah, our life is about to change a whole lot. As Jared mentioned, we have been getting quite a few questions from people about family planning and logistics of traveling while you're pregnant, continuing to travel after you have a baby, those types of things, maternity leave. I know that is something that's on a lot of people's radars. You know, they kind of wonder what's life going to look like. Maybe I'll travel for a little while, but at some point maybe I want to have a family, and so could I continue to travel while I was pregnant? Could I continue to travel after the baby comes? So we wanted to talk through some of that. And again, we'll highlight how our situation is a little bit different, but we definitely have some friends who have done this as well, who are more like traditional travelers in their full-time careers still. So we'll talk through just some different considerations there. We are live on both Facebook and Instagram tonight, and then we will post this later on our podcast and our YouTube as well. So shout out to those of you guys that are watching live. If you are watching live on Instagram or Facebook, we would love if you would just say hi in the comments and let us know who you are. Or just give us a little thumbs up and let us know you're there. And then shout out to those of you guys that will listen later on the replay as well.
Yep. So our situation is definitely a little different. We'll talk about our situation and then compare that to the average traveler, or like, you know, the path most people will be taking. For us, if you've been following us for any length of time, I've written a lot about finances over the years and like plans that we had and financial independence. And one of our goals pretty early on was to try to get to a point of financial independence before we ever had kids. That was kind of like a goal that we didn't know if we'd be able to do. But that was always kind of the ideal, because we didn't want to be the parents that were working all the time. And so we wanted to get to a point of financial independence, and we were lucky enough to get there. And so because of that, we're not taking full-time travel contracts anymore. And so that makes things obviously very different for us.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily have the same constraints as someone who's trying to work full-time continuously throughout the year. We have a lot more flexibility built into our lives now. Now we only work a few months out of each year as therapists. Sometimes that looks like a travel contract, sometimes that's PRN. Most of the time in the past several years, we've just been traveling around the world. We take a lot of time off from work. We also have our online business, Travel Therapy Mentor. Now that was something that was unexpected back when we planned our financial independence journey. We never planned to be entrepreneurs, but now we are, and so we work a lot remotely and from home. So our situation is definitely quite different, but we know that a lot of you are looking at what's it going to look like to work full-time, either through the pregnancy, continue to work full-time after. We want to take into consideration, you know, what's your situation with your partner. You know, for some of you that might look like if you have a travel healthcare partner who can also take contracts, or some of you may not be in that situation. Maybe you're a traveler, but your partner isn't in healthcare. Maybe they work remotely. So it's going to look a little different for certain people. Obviously, of course, there could also be some folks that would be getting pregnant and not have a partner. That would be a completely different situation, but we'll try to talk through some of that here and some of the different considerations. So for us, what we did this year is we took a contract. Actually, I was already pregnant when we took the contract. So we have been doing part-time contracts the last couple of years, which is not usual. We've kind of been splitting a caseload where like one of us will work a couple days a week and the other one of us will work a couple days a week, because we're both PTs. That's definitely not typical, but that's worked out well for us the last couple contracts that we've done. So we did work part-time contracts about 2 hours away from home during the beginning of my pregnancy. It was really nice to only work part-time. I definitely feel for those people that work full-time during pregnancy because it was very exhausting, especially in the first trimester. But we were only about 2 hours from home during that contract, and then I just arranged all my maternity care at home, which is where we plan to return to after that contract and where we are now. So I just kept my same doctor, my same appointments, and I would just drive back the 2 hours every time I had an appointment. So that's kind of what we did, and then I stopped working. We finished our contract when I was about 22 weeks pregnant, and so now we're just home for the rest of my pregnancy, and then we plan to be home for the delivery and the postpartum and all that. And as we mentioned, because we don't work full time anymore, we don't plan to return to work as physical therapists right away, and we're not planning to jump right back into contracts or anything like that. But again, I know that may not be the situation for a lot of people.
Yeah, an interesting thing about pregnancy, I obviously did not know much about pregnancy before all this, was that the first trimester was the hardest so far for Whitney for sure, which was interesting because we thought like, oh, we'll take a contract now early on, we'll finish the contract before things get crazy, and really that was the hardest part of the whole pregnancy, was her probably week like 8 to 13 or 14 was pretty rough, and that was right in the middle of our contract. And it's actually been a lot easier. I think you would have done quite a bit better now on contract than you did in the beginning. And that was just like something we didn't know as not really dealing with pregnancy or anything in the past.
Yeah, everybody's pregnancy is going to be different, but in general, there's a period during the first trimester that tends to be the hardest, and then most people say that it gets easier during the second trimester, which was true for me. My second trimester was really good. And now that I'm in my third trimester, fatigue is definitely starting to set back in. So I'm definitely grateful that I'm not working full-time clinically right now. But I know plenty of therapists that work right up until their due date. It's definitely very doable. Just depends on you and your circumstances. So something to take into consideration. So as far as planning ahead, if you're thinking about planning for a family, planning to get pregnant at some point, there's some things that you're going to want to decide and just take into consideration with you and with your partner. Would you still want to travel during the pregnancy? Would you still want to travel after the baby comes? Would you maybe take time off from traveling and then return to traveling later? We've known people that have done that. Or are you just going to travel up until the point where you want to have kids and then settle down? We know lots of people that do it that way. They just travel for a couple of years and then they settle down into more of like a permanent job, go home back to where they're from, or find a place that they want to live full time. So we know people that have done all across the spectrum of those different choices, but these are the types of decisions that you're going to be making and thinking about.
And probably a lot of you don't really know, because just like us, we don't know if we're going to travel after the baby. We don't know what it's going to be like at all. And you might be in that same situation. Like, maybe I'm going to settle down if things are more difficult than I think, or maybe I'll continue to travel and maybe we'll just see how it goes. That's how we are, and that's how I think a lot of people like going into pregnancy while traveling are as well.
Yeah. I think traditionally most people probably have always thought like, oh, I'll just travel while I'm young, while I'm single, before I have kids, before I have a family, and then that'll just be that phase of my life, and then I'll settle down into a permanent position. And that's kind of the easy route that makes sense for a lot of people. But there are more and more people that are just thinking outside the box, and they're like, you know what, why couldn't I still travel while I was pregnant, or why couldn't I still travel with a baby? So we know more and more people that are doing those things, and they're making it work. So you can really make a lot of this stuff work. It's more just about how you're going to manage the logistics. That's what we'll try to help explain to you a little bit.
Another thing to think about is what your situation is with the partner. Are you both travelers? Is one of the partners, or your partner, if you're a travel therapist, are they someone that could stay at home with the baby? Is that an option at all? Is it just like a single person that's pregnant? That would obviously change things. And then another thing is like, what are you planning to do after the baby's born? Is one of you planning to stay at home? If so, which one? And then also, obviously, childcare can be difficult if you're moving around all the time. So if you're both planning to work, obviously it's going to be much harder. If one person is able to stay at home, then things are certainly a lot easier.
Yeah. Some other things that you're going to be taking into consideration, insurance is a big one. So we'll talk a little bit about insurance, both before the pregnancy, during the pregnancy, after the pregnancy. When the baby comes, all that. So insurance is definitely a big question that we get a lot. We'll talk a little bit about that. You're also going to want to consider, where would you prefer to deliver and receive your maternity care? Because Something I didn't really think much about before becoming pregnant is the number of appointments that you have throughout your pregnancy.
Yeah.
And so it's not so much of just like, oh, I could just travel and do whatever I want up until, 40 weeks when I plan to deliver, and then I'll just figure that part out. No, like you kind of need to be established receiving care throughout. You could always switch care, like see, one doctor during the pregnancy and then switch right at the end for delivery, but that wouldn't be ideal. Ideally, you would stay with the same practice. So that's a consideration in terms of like where you're going to be geographically. And you're also going to want to consider where you're going to be geographically to actually deliver and during your early postpartum period. Like what's the plan for that?
It's a lot more involved than I thought. I remember, it's kind of funny to think back now, like how much things have changed. But I remember there was a time period when we were traveling a lot internationally where I started looking a lot into birth tourism, so having a baby outside the country. And there's a variety of reasons to do that. It can partially be citizenship. It can be, there's some countries where the birth process might actually be better, and then also cost is a factor. And I was looking a lot into that, and I was thinking like, oh, that might be a great idea. And then now that we've gone through a lot of this, I'm like, that would have been way too difficult. Like, I don't even know how you would do that, because unless you just like, you had all your appointments here in the US and then you traveled and just gave birth there, but that would like put you in a weird situation where you're not familiar with anything. So anyway, I, like Whitney in the beginning, thought like, oh, this is just the thing where you're fine, and then 2 weeks you're ready to go, and you go to another country maybe, and it's a lot more involved than I thought.
Yeah, so definitely we're going to talk through kind of the logistics of that. So let's talk about during pregnancy. So one thing that should be on your radar even before, like hopefully you're going to be in a situation where you're planning to get pregnant and you're planning ahead. Now, obviously there will be situations where you get pregnant unexpectedly and then you're just having to figure it out from there. We've definitely talked to folks that happens to. Not a huge deal. You've got 9 months to figure it out. But if you are planning ahead, I would plan ahead and start thinking ahead about insurance. So we got married last year and we knew that, we wanted to start having a family shortly after getting married. So last year is when I started thinking about my insurance. At the time, I was on a private plan through a private company. And that plan did not include any kind of really maternity coverage. And so I knew I was going to need to get off that. So last November, during open enrollment, I got out of that plan and enrolled in a marketplace plan. So that's just an independent plan. It's not through any company, it's through the government marketplace. And so that's what I think is a good option for a lot of travel therapists. We get this question a lot of like, should I go through company insurance? Should I go through some sort of private plan or some sort of marketplace plan? A lot of us choose to do marketplace year round or some kind of private plan year round, so you don't have to worry about switching between companies and that sort of thing. And I just knew that was going to be the best thing for us because we especially don't work full time. Now, if you are somebody who has been taking consistent back-to-back travel therapy contracts and you've kind of been with the same company and been with the same insurance, it might not be a bad idea just to stay on that insurance, especially if you plan to continue to work travel contracts leading up to part of your pregnancy or your whole pregnancy. We definitely have some friends that just recently had a baby, and that's what they did. They worked pretty much through most of the pregnancy. They're both PTs. And they both were on contract up until basically the delivery, and so they just stayed on their company insurance, and then we're going to use Cobra, which is kind of like a carryover. How do you explain Cobra? It's a
continuation of your current health insurance benefits, just at a higher cost. So it's not subsidized by your company anymore, but you can continue the same benefits. You just pay the entire premium instead of just the amount you're paying, and then the company subsidizes some of it. You pay the entire amount.
Yeah, and that's the same as if you worked at a permanent staff job or anything. If you leave and discontinue your employment with that company, you're eligible to apply for Cobra and cover you for a short-term period until you go on to the next job. So it's not a bad idea to go on company insurance, but I do think for most people, just to have consistency, to stay on the same insurance throughout your pregnancy, throughout your postpartum, after the baby, all that, marketplace is probably your best bet.
And you also, if you are on a current plan outside of your employer, you're not taking company insurance, so you have a marketplace plan, it's a good idea to look at the coverage of the plan that you're choosing right now. That is definitely something we did last year, going into this year, knowing that we were probably trying to get pregnant. We have traditionally been on high deductible plans, and to try to keep the premium low. We don't really have a lot of medical issues, so we don't go to the doctor that much, and going on the high deductible plans made sense for us back before thinking about pregnancy. But then looking at the costs of things, all these appointments and the birth process and all that, we decided to really compare and dig deeper into which one would be the best choice for us. And it made a lot more sense for Whitney to go on like a gold plan that is like an extra $60 or $70 a month, but has much better coverage. So even if you are on a private insurance plan or a marketplace plan now, you still probably want to reevaluate and make sure that's still the best option, knowing that you're going to have these additional medical expenses for the upcoming year.
Now, say that you're not in a situation to plan ahead and switch during open enrollment like I was. Don't worry if you are employed and then you become unemployed, basically, once you finish a contract. That's always a life event where they allow you a new open enrollment period. So anytime you finish a travel therapy contract, you'll be eligible. It's considered a life event. You've lost your job, so you'll be eligible to enroll in a marketplace plan at that time if you would like to. So there are circumstances there. But something I did learn is becoming pregnant is not considered a qualifying life event. So just becoming pregnant doesn't qualify you to have an open enrollment period and switch. However, having a baby does. So either losing your job or having the baby will qualify you any time of year to go ahead and enroll in a marketplace plan if you would like to at that time. So you'll have options.
Yep. As we go through these things too, people watching on Instagram or Facebook, if you have any questions about any of this, or if we don't cover something, definitely ask those and we'll cover those at the end.
Yeah, and again, if you guys are getting value out of this video, if you're learning anything, we'd love if you would just hit the thumbs up button. All right, so talking more about during pregnancy and your plan for that. I have to just say, although we have lived like very nomadic lives and we are the travel people and we are all about like, you can make travel work doing anything, I have to say consistency during your pregnancy is a very important thing. I came to find out that it's so much better if you're in a more consistent and stable location throughout the whole pregnancy and delivery process. For a lot of different reasons. One, the number of doctor's appointments, and two, the insurance, those types of considerations. I just didn't realize like how often you'd be going to the doctor. Pretty much for the first several months, you go once a month, and then you start going once every 2 weeks, and then you start going once a week. And that's assuming everything's normal. If there's something abnormal, you might go even more often. So it's better to have consistency. So even though you can still travel, I think that we'll talk about that here in a minute. So one is consistency is important for the doctor's appointments. Consistency is important for your insurance situation. Also, it's kind of hard emotionally and physically, especially that first trimester. So the more consistent and like stable your work environment is, the better. I wouldn't really want to be like switching contract to contract to contract and moving between contracts during that time, because that would just be a lot. There's certain people that do it, but I think it's better if you're kind of in a stable situation. It's also just hard to be moving around and like having a lot of changes during this time because of all the logistics.
Yeah, I think that is probably anybody watching this wondering this question, wondering about pregnancy, family planning as your first kid, and you don't know how it's going to go, you don't know how pregnancy is going to be or anything like that. So being in a situation that is more stable, or at least once you get pregnant and you know you're pregnant, at least planning to be somewhere where it's more stable and consistent is probably a really good idea, because there's so many things that can happen. Like the baby can come early, you can have way more physical symptoms than you ever think. It can be physically difficult, emotionally difficult. So having some consistency, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so with that said, I think that's why for a lot of people, it just makes sense to maybe stop traveling while you're pregnant. We might go through talking about all these things about how you could make it work, and then at the end of the day, you might just say like, that just sounds too complicated. I'm just going to stop traveling while I'm pregnant. Like that makes more sense for me. And it does make more sense for a lot of people just to go back home and just stop traveling during that period. However, if you did want to try to continue to travel during your pregnancy, it's possible, but we would recommend trying to lock down a long contract. So it's kind of like you were in the same place for like 9 months to a year as a traveler, but you had the same situation. And that's what our friends that were recently pregnant and had a baby did. They extended their contract or like signed up for an initial contract that was like 10 to 12 months. So they knew they'd be in the same place during the whole pregnancy and delivery and postpartum and all that. Right. So that would be nice just for the consistency of your work environment, the consistency of your doctor. You could go ahead and set up your maternity care in that area.
And kind of an ideal along with that is if you're going to do a long contract, or even if you're not going to do a long contract, if that's not feasible, maybe trying to be closer to home for that contract, maybe a couple hours away or something, makes more sense because then you have some family support. Ideally, you have some friends there that can help out if things are difficult, or you just have more emotional support if you need it. And then probably a lot of people are going to be giving birth back home or somewhere like that where you have family or friends nearby too. So getting a lot of your appointments and things and getting established somewhere closer to home, kind of like we did, hour and a half or 2 hours from home, I think that makes things a lot more simple.
Yeah, because then you could still be taking advantage of the travel pay and the adventure and all that, but still kind of be close to home to get your maternity care and stuff done like that. So that's kind of what we did. We took a contract 2 hours from home so we could still go back home for all my maternity care and be near family. However, our friends took a job not close to home, but they still had a stable lease for about 10 or 12 months, the same job for 10 or 12 months. So it was almost like they were kind of settled down in this travel contract for almost a whole year, and then they just decided to establish themselves with a practitioner there and plan their delivery there. Even though they didn't have family in that area, they still had a lot of consistency during this time. So I think that would be our recommendation to make it the easiest. You could also do something similar to that, and you could work all the way through the end, or you could plan to wrap up the contract early like we did, and then actually move back home or wherever you plan to deliver toward the end of the pregnancy.
A lot of people thinking about continuing to travel while pregnant are travel pairs. That seems to be by far the most common. I think we only know travel pairs that have gotten pregnant or given birth, right, while traveling. I don't think it's...
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, but I guess for most people that we talk to, it's they have a partner that can travel with them either because the partner is a healthcare traveler or because the partner works remotely. So I guess it would be similar in both regards, but a lot of the ones that we know are actually just travel therapists couples or travel nurse couples.
Yeah, so for travel pairs, it kind of changes things a little bit. Most travel pairs that we know, one of them ends up staying at home with the baby to watch the baby because, like we said, childcare can be difficult. And so that could be something like 2 part-time contracts like we're talking about where you alternate days or something, so you have someone at home, or it could be one person working a 3-month contract and then the other person working a 3-month contract after that. You kind of alternate. I think that is probably the most common way that people do it, just because it's especially with a little small baby, it's really difficult to find childcare, and it's hard for parents to give up their baby to someone to watch them for extended periods of time throughout the day that you're not really comfortable with.
Yeah, and we'll get into talking about that a little bit more after we talk about the delivery and the postpartum. But similarly, during the actual pregnancy, you could also be making these decisions of, if I am a travel pair, are both of us going to continue to work out throughout the whole pregnancy? But you could also go ahead and just go into that situation where if, the one of you that's pregnant doesn't want to work the whole time, maybe just your partner could work and you're just kind of there along for the ride. And then that gives you more of a chance to physically prepare yourself for the delivery. Our friends that were doing it, and they were both working as travel PTs. They were planning to both work all the way through the end of the pregnancy. However, toward the end of her pregnancy, she decided to go ahead and end her contract early. And she only worked up to 36 weeks, but he continued to work through the whole 40 weeks. So lots of options there. Definitely when you're a travel team, you have more flexibility there to do whatever works best for you. Okay. So let's talk about the delivery and the postpartum period. We kind of already alluded to this. You want to decide where you want to be during the delivery and the postpartum period. It might make sense for you to do the contract near home, if home is where you'd like to deliver, or get into a stable contract for a longer period of time and plan to deliver there. Okay, I guess actually we already kind of talked a little bit about this, the different scenarios there, kind of what we did. We wrapped up early and then just went back home, or you could plan to just stay in that same area for a while. And then during the actual postpartum period, one of the big benefits of being a travel healthcare provider is the flexibility. So when we start talking about maternity leave, part of the being eligible to have a maternity leave is, are you just going to have a job to go back to when you get done? What's the period of time you can take off and still have a job after? And then the second part of that is, what's your income situation during that time? The first part of it is super flexible. It's great being a travel therapist because you don't have to ask your employer, can I have 12 weeks off? You can take off infinite number of months, weeks, however long you want to take off after. And I think that's a really great benefit of being a travel therapist. As long as you plan accordingly and can afford the time off, you don't have to be back at work at a certain time. And that's something we're really grateful with our freedom right now, is that, people are like, well, when are you going to go back to work as a PT? And I'm like, I don't know, whenever I feel like it. Like, I don't have to commit to something. So it's going to be so nice for you to have that flexibility if you continue to be a travel therapist, that you can just take off the time as long as you would like to. And then, similarly with your travel partner, you would just decide, is my travel partner going to continue to work during my immediate postpartum time, or would they take off some time with me as well? So you guys would have a lot of flexibility there to decide what that period immediate postpartum looks like. And then from there, let's talk a little bit about kind of like maternity leave and benefits, because we get a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, so as a traveler, obviously your employment is short term. The benefits are not as good as a permanent job, of course. You don't have vacation time, you don't have sick time usually, unless you're working in some states. So yes, there's no sort of like maternity leave or coverage, which is also the case for a lot of permanent jobs. It's just FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, where you get 6 or 8 weeks off after birth for the mother. But a lot of jobs don't have like paid time off. It's just like you get this time off, you get to have your job back. So a lot of it comes down to saving ahead of time, no matter what your situation. But as a traveler, that is especially the case. You really need to have enough savings and things to cover you for this period of time, however long it's going to be. If it's going to be 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months, however long you want to take off, plan ahead, have some money set aside for that time, because there's really no other maternity benefits outside of just having the flexibility that we have as travelers.
Yeah. So being that we started as travel therapists from the very beginning, we went from being students. I'd never really had much of a real job before that, part-time jobs here and there, but I had never really thought much about benefits that were offered by a regular employer. A lot of you may be coming from a different situation where you've had a permanent job before, or you've interviewed for permanent jobs, or you've talked to people that had permanent jobs. And so you come into travel therapy and you're just like, why don't we get PTO? Why don't we get maternity leave? Why don't we get these benefits? Why don't we get this? So it's important to understand, as a travel therapist, the nature of our employment is temporary contract employment. So they don't, because you only have to commit to these travel companies for the length of one contract, for 6 weeks, 13 weeks, 6 months. So beyond that, they don't really provide a lot of these like paid time off type benefits, because it doesn't work well with the nature of the contract employment. So a lot of people are like, well, that sucks that you're not getting these benefits. But as we've started to learn, as we've gotten further into our profession and we've done more research on it to further understand the way that benefits work, I've come to understand more than I used to, where ultimately benefits, they come out of your pay in one way or another. Whether
you're a permanent employee or a traveler, it's the same way.
Yeah. So as a travel therapist, we make, almost double in most circumstances what you would make at a permanent job. So basically you're just forced to have to plan ahead more and provide for your own savings, instead of having an employer sponsored benefit plan where they're keeping money aside from your pay package to pay for these benefits for you.
Yeah, something like maternity leave, it's very similar to other sorts of bonuses that we've talked about in the past. Because basically what a company would do if they were going to offer maternity leave or some sort of paid time off, PTO, sick leave, maternity leave, that you would be paid for, they would be taking a portion of what you normally would get paid and set that aside to then be able to give it to you, right? Because let's say a company has a low profit margin, they can't take the money out of their profit margin to give you, they're just setting aside money that you would have already gotten. And that's how benefits are in general, like health insurance, if it's through an employer, that's money that the employer is paying on your behalf towards health insurance that otherwise they would have been able to give you as part of your pay. So for us, we really don't want to get a bunch of benefits. We would much rather make as much money as possible and then do what we want to do with that money, saving ourselves versus having someone else save for us. And we've talked a lot about the bonuses, but that's kind of what makes the most sense here is like, let's say a travel company is offering a completion bonus of $2,000. Well, they're not just giving you $2,000 out of their pocket. They're taking a little bit of money that you would have gotten each week, and then they're giving that to you at the end. That's not a benefit. That is just them giving you some of the money that you would have gotten otherwise, all at the one time. So things like maternity leave, things like bonuses, we think, and obviously the travel world is set up this way, that you make more money up front, you save it how you want instead of someone forcing you to take that money and then giving it to you later in the form of a leave or a bonus.
Yeah, we hear a lot of people, we have a lot of friends too that work permanent staff therapy jobs, and they're just like, I don't understand, why don't we get paid maternity leave, even at a staff PT job quite often? But you have to just look at the big picture of, it feels good to feel as though the company is giving you something. It feels good when you sign up for a job and they're like, you're going to make this salary, plus you get this benefit, this benefit, this benefit. That feels good because you're like, they're giving me something for free in addition to this salary. That's great. But kind of think about it like, what if you're someone who never plans to have kids? What if you're a single person that never plans to have kids? But now the whole organization is structuring their benefits packages around providing everyone maternity leave or this or that, but you never use it. Well, then shouldn't you have just gotten paid more? Because you're not ever going to use that benefit. So if you look at it from a big picture perspective, it's really just them moving money around and setting things aside for you. It's like a forced savings. Same kind of thing where like they used to do pensions back in the day, but now a lot of companies are moving more toward like not doing that, not having an employer sponsored plan. Maybe you have to do your own HSA or not HSA, your
401k.
IRA, 401k, that sort of thing. You're having to instead plan for it yourself and choose to invest it and save it yourself rather than them just setting it aside for you. So that's kind of the way that maternity leave is like heading in the direction of, or paternity leave or whatever, FMLA. So don't look at it like it's such a negative. Just look at it like you just have to do more planning on your own and set the money aside. And really it shouldn't be that big of a concern because you should be making so much more as a travel therapist. You just have to be a little bit more mindful of your savings. We were definitely more extreme in the beginning where we were saving 75% or more of our income. That's definitely not the norm, I wouldn't say, but I would say it's definitely feasible to think that you could be saving 25 to 50% of your income and setting it aside for future savings, whether that's retirement, maternity, etc. But all of that to say, it's not typically going to be a thing where you just get paid maternity leave as a traveler. You're just going to have to allot for that time on your own. Now, what if you're like, well, is there anything I could get? In some circumstances, there are. There are certain states, like Jared said, where they have like state mandated FMLA type benefits, so you could definitely look into your state. I think like maybe New York, New Jersey, California, Washington, possibly. Don't quote me, but check for your state and see if are there any benefits you can apply through your state. There are some short-term disability plans that you could pay toward and get some benefit there. So you could definitely look into some of these options, but for the most part, it's basically just planning to save on your own.
Yeah, those short-term disability options, another thing you have to remember is if you do sign up for it, some companies offer that as part of their benefits, or you can go outside and get your own coverage. But just remember that as a traveler, one of the downsides of having a low taxable pay and getting all these tax-free benefits is that any sort of workers' compensation or short-term disability, long-term disability, any of these things are based on your taxable pay only. And it's a percentage of the taxable pay, so it's really not much money compared to what you're used to making as a traveler. So even if you do something like short-term disability, it might be 20 to 30% of what you're used to making as a traveler. So it's still not a huge benefit.
Yeah. I know we got a couple questions on Instagram. Let's see if right now I don't think we have any questions on Facebook, but if you guys do have questions as we're going along, feel free to go ahead and put those in the comments. We have a few more things that we're going to talk through here, and then we'll answer any questions that you have. So with that said, you've already thought through the process for your pregnancy, you've thought through the process for your delivery, you've thought through the process of immediately postpartum, how you're going to plan for your maternity leave. Both partners going to take off work for a while? Have you saved up enough money to where that's financially feasible for you? Versus maybe if one partner is going to work. For some people, again, it might make sense during this immediate postpartum period that you've gone back home for a bit. And maybe in that circumstance, maybe if your partner is also a therapist or a healthcare worker, maybe they're working PRN at home for a bit before you guys plan to go back out and start traveling again. Or maybe you've just decided that you're going to stay home for a while, for a whole year. Maybe your partner's gone ahead and gotten a permanent job for a bit. And then after you finish your immediate postpartum period, maybe you're going to get a permanent job for a bit or whatever it might be. If you are considering traveling after you have a baby, there's definitely some pros and cons to that. So we want to talk through some of that.
The biggest pro, we talked about this a lot, and I think that's probably why a lot of people consider traveling as a couple after having a baby, is that like Whitney said, a lot of times you can make twice as much money on a travel contract as you would at a permanent job. So if you think about being at home, working a permanent job for both people, traveling, you could usually have one person work a contract and the other person stay at home and make as much money as you would working a permanent job back home for both of you. That's really appealing to a lot of people because if you're working 3 months on and then the other person's working 3 months, you both have childcare and you're making basically what money you would make at home. So I think that's probably by far the biggest benefit is more money gives you more flexibility like we always talk about with travel in general. You just have more flexibility when you're making twice as much money or in some cases even more than that. So easier to live off of one income, and a lot of people prefer to be at home for 3 or 6 months anyway with a newborn, and so that makes that more feasible if you have tight finances or something like that.
Yeah, so if you're thinking about, those early years, yes, there are cons to maybe going and traveling with the baby. Some of the cons might be, it's going to be a little harder logistically to travel with the baby. You may not want to be away from family. Childcare can be a little harder, that sort of thing. But a lot of people are looking at it like, if we settle down and both take staff PT jobs or whatever discipline you are, we're going to take a huge hit on our finances. And now probably both of us are going to have to go back to work, whereas we prefer if one of us could stay home. And then you're also having to pay for childcare and all this. So financially, for a lot of people, it's like, wow, we could just continue to travel, even if that meant taking travel contracts like closer to home, and then just live off one income. And we're basically still making double, and we have our childcare figured out. So for a lot of people, it really makes sense, childcare and financially wise. And then also, you still are getting the other benefits of getting to explore and make new memories as a family and do cool things, and have, more flexible time off and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of people that are really leaning towards still traveling after they have a baby, but we can also understand why logistically for some people that just may not work. As we kind of alluded to before, it seems like the best scenario from people that we've talked to that travel once they have the baby is that just one partner works and the other one keeps the child. Because if you both go back to taking contracts, well, you can make a lot more money that way, but now you're having to figure out childcare away from your support systems. It's possible, but it's not easy because now you're going to have to be interviewing new childcare locations all the time. It may be hard to get in or get established with a childcare setup.
It's just another thing to add to the logistics that are already sometimes difficult with travel. You're trying to find 2 contracts that are good. You're trying to find a location that's decent. You're trying to find a place that has housing that's reasonably priced. And then in addition, you're trying to find childcare that you're comfortable with. And that makes the process much harder, especially traveling as a couple.
Yeah. If you're both travel therapists or healthcare travelers, you could alternate taking contracts. Like if one of you still wants to be able to keep up your skills, so it's not always the one taking contracts, you could alternate taking contracts. You could do what we've done where we split a contract, something like that, if that's an option. So there's definitely there's ways to make it work. But it seems like it works the best if only one of you is working at a time, so that you have childcare built in.
Yeah, and then like when you kind of mentioned earlier, taking contracts not too far from home after the baby is born, like maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours away, where you're still making the travel pay, which is mostly the benefit for people and why a lot of people choose to travel is the extra pay. But you're still not too far away if you need help from family or friends, which is really nice.
Yeah. And as we dive into talking just more about this traveling with a family, we've actually done videos on this before. We've had a couple guest posts as well. So if you want to learn more about traveling as a family, traveling with children, we have at least 2 guest posts on our website from 2 different families that have made it work. And we've done videos talking more in depth about the process of traveling with a family once you get to that stage. It does seem that the families that we've known that have done it, a lot of them, the RV route seems to work well for them. So they kind of have a consistency with their home, but not everybody does it that way. We know other therapists that don't do it that way. Our friends who recently had the baby and took some time off after they took 6 weeks off, and now they've moved to a new location where they're planning on signing a 9-month contract again to kind of have more consistency. And one of them is working to start with, but they may go into a situation where the other one works part-time. But they haven't decided yet. So yeah, lots of options to make it work. We know a lot of people that are making it work for them and for their family. Yeah,
we've done videos in the past on the pros and cons of RVs, and a lot of it comes down to the lifestyle you want, how long you plan to travel, those sorts of things. But some things that can really tilt the options in favor of an RV or a travel trailer or something like that are pets and kids. It seems like that makes things a lot easier because there's more consistency. You're not having to work around so many different barriers when you're trying to find housing. It can be really hard to find reasonable housing that has enough room for a family or that will take pets and those types of things. So this is where, if you were planning to travel, I think that an RV or a travel trailer would be a serious consideration because it can just make the whole process easier and a little more streamlined when you're moving from place to place.
Yeah. All right, so let's take some questions that you guys have here for those of you that are watching live. All right. So Michaela says, yo, y'all are awesome. Been wondering what your financial plans were for this big step, and congrats again. So financially, that's kind of a broad question, but we could address it from two aspects. So financially, considering the time off, like the maternity leave, but also just financially planning for the new expenses that are going to come along with a baby. And so fortunately for us, as we've mentioned before, we worked so hard in the beginning to get into a position of financial independence. We've been planning for this really for years. I mean, we never knew exactly when we were going to have kids, but all along we were saving 75% or more of our income. And so we have set ourselves up for the future with all of our investments, all of our savings for years and years planning for this. So we're not feeling at all financially burdened at this stage. We don't work full time anymore anyway. So whether or not we were taking the time off right now to have a baby or we were taking the time off just to take one of our regular trips, we're in the same financial situation. So we feel very fortunate that we looked into all this. I'm forever grateful to Jared for learning so much about finance back in the beginning. I've mentioned it before and I'll say it again. I never knew anything about finance when I was in school, coming out of school. I didn't know anything about saving and investing and all that. So between Jared's financial planning for the both of us and the perks of being a travel therapist and making about double what we make as staff PTs, we have set ourselves up so well financially. And year after year, I'm just like amazed. I'm so thankful now that we set ourselves up early so that we don't have to worry about our finances at this stage of life.
Yeah, and for you guys that maybe if you're thinking about all this and it's 3 or 4 years away, you'll really think yourself, if you put yourself in a good financial position, start saving and investing now. You'll really appreciate that later. It just gives you so many more options and so much more stability.
Yeah, I can't say it enough how life-changing travel healthcare can be if you use it in an intentional way to get ahead financially. It's easy to say, oh, I'm making so much more, I can go and have all these fun adventures, and you should have fun adventures, but set money aside for your future first. Set a goal, whether you're going to save 25% or whatever it is. Set that money aside from each paycheck. Go ahead and get your savings going. You're going to thank yourself later when you have more flexibility. I have a lot of friends and I know a lot of people that they're in a situation where they're like, one, I can barely afford my maternity time off from work. Two, how on earth are we going to afford childcare? There's so many people that are struggling financially right now to have a family and to pay for childcare. But this is such a unique life hack to be a travel healthcare worker and have this opportunity to earn this extra income. So use it for good. Use it to put it towards savings. We're not unique or special. We don't come from rich families, nothing like that. This was all just, we went to physical therapy school, just like a lot of you. We came out, got jobs as travel therapists, and just started putting money aside, just throwing it at our 401k, throwing it at our HSA. I came from a family, we both came from families with like lots of credit card debt, lots of Jared's family at some point filed for bankruptcy. And so, it just took a little bit of extra time and effort to learn this stuff. And you can really set yourself up for a good financial situation too.
Yep.
All right. So another question here on Instagram. This is unrelated to the current topic, but we'll answer it anyway. Were you able to study for certifications in CEUs during travel or have a benefit package for it?
It's harder for sure as a traveler to take courses and stuff just because you're moving around and it's hard to plan too far in advance. We didn't do any special certifications. We never really saw a major need to do it. We've done a ton of CEUs over the years, just various things we're interested in. In terms of benefits package that covers it, kind of like what we talked about earlier, you're going to have less benefits as a traveler, but you make more money. So you can set the money aside for whatever you want to set it aside for instead of it being forced set aside for you to pay for these things. There are some companies that will cover a certain number of CEUs or a certain dollar amount of CEUs per year when you take contracts with them. It could be like $200 per contract they put aside for continuing education, or $500 or something like that. Or maybe if you work for them for a year, they give you $1,000 for CEUs or something like that. A lot of companies also give you online access to like MedBridge, which we've gotten a lot of value from over the years. So there's a variety of ways to handle that if you do want to get certifications or you do want to take a lot of classes. But a lot of it is you just saving money and putting that towards whatever you want to put it towards.
Yeah. Okay, another comment that we got here. Excited for y'all. My wife is pregnant as well. Congratulations, and I'm a traveling therapist. How did you go about choosing insurance plans from the different recruiting companies? I don't know when you hopped on the video, but for a little while there, if you go back and watch the replay, we did talk about insurance plans. Now that we don't work full time anymore, we have maintained our own insurance independent of the travel companies for several years now, and that tends to work well for a lot of people when they're planning on taking time off between contracts or in other circumstances. However, if you do plan to work consistent back-to-back contracts, that's what we did for several years. When we were taking back-to-back contracts, we would be on the company insurance. How to go about choosing which insurance plan? Insurance is complicated. It's always more complicated than you think. It's like, we work in healthcare. I should understand insurance more than I do, but you just gotta look at the plans, try to compare them side by side. And
we spend a lot of time on this, even looking at the marketplace plans compared to like private insurance plans and the various marketplace plans and comparing them. There's some tools that you can use where you're kind of like entering the number of visits you think you'll have and what sort of medical issues, including pregnancy or birth, that you might have throughout the year. And then it gives you an estimated cost from the different plans, like taking into account the premium and the deductible and the amount of those visits and how much the copay is and all that. But still, I mean, it's not easy, but definitely choosing a plan that has a little more coverage probably just makes sense. So looking more at like the silver and gold tier plans on the marketplace instead of bronze or the lower tier plans, that can make sense. And if you're going through company insurance, then just look usually at the higher tier plans, even if they're an extra $100 a month or $100 a week or however much it is. A lot of times it's going to save you more money going with a more expensive premium versus going with a lower premium, higher deductible plan when you know you're going to have these medical expenses.
Yeah, and in your case, it depends. It sounds like maybe if you're the travel therapist and your wife is not, it's possible that you're looking at the plans for a family to be like, what's the plan going to include if I add my wife as a dependent or partner, however that works. You also would be wanting to look into the next phase of what's it going to look like once I add the child and now family plan. So those are some questions you might want to ask the HR department. Or in our case, like when we were going through the marketplace, like just comparing side by side, what's it going to look like now and what's it going to look like once we add the child to it? How much is the premium going to go up and all that sort of thing. You want to see what's covered in terms of maternity care, and you also want to see what's covered in terms of children's, like pediatric care.
What was this question mark? Oh, there's a question tab on Instagram. I've never seen that before.
All right, so Kelly says, we have been projecting our extra money towards student loans to get rid of that prior to kids, but we're also interested in learning the finance aspect after we get done with the student loans. Any advice on where to look for investments to prepare prior to kids that with that goal in mind for the loans as well? That's a great question, Kelly.
There's a lot of really good books. There's tons of really good websites out there. I would say some books to think about. There's The Simple Path to Wealth. I think that's a really good book just to cover just the basics of saving and investing. I think if you just read that book and followed the advice, you'd be ahead by 99% of most people, and you don't have to make it real complicated. It's pretty simple. You can make investing as complex as you want it to be or as simple as you want it to be. You can just literally set aside $300 a week or $400 a week to put towards index funds, max out your 401k, max out an IRA, put the extra money towards index funds in a brokerage account, and just be done with it. That's very simple. You don't ever have to look at it. Continue to dollar cost average over time. That has paid off for everyone throughout history. So it can be that simple, or you can really go deep into like real estate investing and options trading and things like that. So it can be very simple or very complex. If you're the type of person that just wants it to be simple and you just want to set some money aside to put yourself in a good position for the future without spending a lot of time and effort on it, then yeah, The Simple Path of Wealth is where I would start. And then there's another book Choose FI. They have a podcast and a website, and they also have a book. It was actually written by a PT that we're friends with, and I would definitely recommend that book as well. So Simple Path to Wealth and Choose FI. I think it's
the blueprint to financial independence.
Yeah, something like that.
So Kelly's question, just to expand on that a little bit, I think a lot of people are in this situation too, where they're like, at what point do I just throw money toward my student loans versus investing? We get that question a lot. That's definitely deeper than we're going to have time to go into on tonight's video.
We have talked about in past videos, though, student loans, how we handle it.
Yeah.
We've talked about investing and how we handle that.
So go back and check out some of our finance content. If you want to dive deeper on our personal blog, which is called fifthwheelpt.com, Jared writes a lot about finance, investing, and savings. I think early on, even if you do want to tackle your student loans and try to knock them out, I would still at least be putting a little bit of money early on into your retirement savings. Don't just go full on 100%. For X number of years, at least put a small amount into investing and into your savings accounts early on, just to especially take advantage of compounding interest early on. But the thing that I've learned over the years, coming from someone who knows nothing about finance, is the most important thing is the fact that you're just choosing to set money aside. Regardless of where you put it, regardless of what you do with it, just make sure that you're committing yourself to putting it aside. Whether that's a simple savings account, that's a great start. You're going to be ahead financially compared to your peers by a long shot, even if all you do is put it in a savings account.
Yeah.
So don't worry too much about the intricacies of whether you're the best investor ever. Just make sure that you're committing yourself to saving that 10%, 25%, 50% of your income, whatever it is. And then, like Jared said, there's a couple books and podcasts and stuff you can look at to decide what investment vehicle or whatever you're going to put it in, but just make sure you're setting it aside.
Yeah, especially early on, your savings rate has so much more impact on your financial position than any sort of investment returns. And the reason for that is because your portfolio is really small early on. So say you have $2,000 invested, whether you get a 30% return or a 5% return, it's not going to make a huge impact because it's not much money invested. Whereas if you set aside 20% of your income or 50% of your income, that's going to have a massive impact. So your savings rate is always important, but it's really important in the beginning because that's how you're building up the capital to invest in the first place. So don't put the cart before the horse. Don't worry too much about where you're putting the money early on. Just get in the habit of saving that extra money and put it towards something productive. Even a high yield savings account right now, you can get 4 or 5%, which is pretty decent.
We do talk quite a bit about finances in our travel therapy course as well. If you guys have ever looked into our travel therapy course, it's not just about being a travel therapist. We titled it Becoming a Financially Successful Travel Therapist because I think that really is a big thing that sets us apart from some other travel therapists that we've gone into travel healthcare with the intention of getting in a good financial position, and we've done just that, and it is replicable. So we designed our course to be able to teach you not only just like the 101 of travel therapy, but like how to do it in an intentional way and set yourself up for future success financially. So definitely check out our course if that's something that you're interested in. And then again, like I said, Jared has a lot of articles on our personal blog about finances, and we have some on our travel therapy mentor website as well. But okay, so we'll wrap up this evening, this topic. So just to kind of summarize everything we talked about with the pregnancy, the postpartum, the maternity care, and all that. There's lots of logistics to consider. You really need to weigh your options personally, your priorities, your goals, your personal situation, your partner situation. If you want to continue to be a travel therapist throughout pregnancy, throughout postpartum, throughout having a family, you can definitely do it. There's just going to be more logistics to take into account, and you have to decide what's most important to you. But we know all kinds of people that make all kinds of situations work. So if you're really determined and you think it's going to be a good fit for you, you can make it work. But at the end of the day, it might not be right for you. It just depends.
Yep.
All right, so hopefully that helped to answer some of your questions. Feel free to send us a message if you have more questions or leave further comments on the video later, and we'll go back and look at the replay and answer your questions later.
All right, take care, everyone.
All right, have a good night.
Bye.